All right, so hi everyone. Hope you're having a great GCAP. So for those who don't know me, my name is Ngoc. I'm an artist at Route 59. We're currently making a game called Necrobarista, which kind of toots itself as an anime game because, you know, as a team, we were really interested in anime and what we could do in the game space. So part of why I like anime's approach is largely character design. So characters to me, they're one of the most direct ways an audience can empathize, as well as understand the themes of a game's narrative or mechanic. Characters can motivate people to pick up a controller just for the novelty of roleplay. So dependent on our tastes and how we feel about a style, it can be why we pick up a box or leave a game at the store. Anime has a significant fan base that is very vocal in giving its opinions on what makes a good anime. And in our design document at Route 59, of the aim of making an anime game that was to appeal to this fan base, we needed to examine as well as determine the properties of what makes anime appealing to look at. So, a little introduction. I don't have a formal arts education, really, nor have I worked on an anime before. I'm sort of shooting my shot, essentially, in making Necrobarista. Instead, I studied for a Bachelor of Design in Games, but I think anyone with an interest starts out rather distant to where they want to be. And it can get frustrating when it seems undefined. Regardless, I decided to take my own education in art at my own pace to tailor my circumstances. Oh, yeah, I was supposed to play those while I was going, but in the beginning, I did start with anime, but then I felt that, you know, in order to explore and define, I guess, what anime was to me, or define what like art was to me, I decided to split. And this was really to like explore the depths of different styles and where my interest was in those. So when I came back to develop an anime style for Necrobarista, I found that some techniques that I had used for other styles, some were encroaching a little bit too far on the style, and while some were helping me to visualize it for consistency. So to me, anime is a rather difficult word to define stylistically. It encompasses many elements and has many exceptions. To people getting acquainted with anime, it can mean singular concepts like cartoons from Japan or big eyes. To a more familiar audience, we can see that the anime style is a lot more nuanced and has versatility to carry a lot more complex themes. I don't think that we should enforce or identify a style by location in this age of globalization. So to what I identify anime is, in essence, a collective but not exclusive way to the way characters emote and the way that they're designed. So why we were deciding to make an anime, there are projects that are happening outside of Japan. They're made by people who grew up watching and enjoying anime, as I hope some of you in this room are. It's growing to be a phenomenon that's increasingly embraced by creators all around the world for their projects. So the purpose is, as one of these creators choosing to work in this sphere, with only information freely available to whoever can find it, is to examine the criteria, the artistic properties of what a viewer would perceive as anime and try, I guess, determine what makes them feel that this is an anime. So from my experience being lead artist and giving consultancy to my team for this game for 5 years, right, I can very confidently say that anime is a style that commands solid artistic discipline and requires one to read between the lines to stay balanced within it. So I'm going to address the elephant in the room. There are some uncomfortable pieces that have come out to people exploring this style, but you can see that they have elements of like anime. But, you know, when people see these pieces, there's something missing to them. So I guess what I want to ask is, how do you turn these around for the better? Most of the time when figuring out a piece, it can boil down to addressing 3 points. These points, although they're subtle and unique to every piece that you make, or even every artist, they are key contributors that can give an extra dimension and elevate, as well as keep quality at a consistent level when you draw your characters. It's similar to saying that a master, I guess a good job is done when people don't notice it, when people can't like really get a snag of like, oh, that was a bit weird. So the first one is visual adaptation. It means how facial features are rendered and sort of determines how to keep and curate the style. Secondly is placement and composition. It's how we determine where facial features are in the space and think about how we're going to create balance and use that visual abstraction to create interest and movement. The third is rendering, where we start to look at line, tone, color, and contrast to support this composition. In anime, what's shown and what isn't shown work together to make a style that's versatile to both simple and complex emotions. It's also efficient in the way it achieves this. In saying that, anime is also very responsive to changes and requires both an understanding of both the subject matter that sits in reality and its intrinsic purpose in the work. It will be fair to say that it is intimidating, like there's an etiquette to it, and only one single line can throw it off kilter. But on the flip side, it takes minor adjustments to make them better. The only difference is what those adjustments signify in the background and how we're going to sell them. So anime is undeniably different to other styles of animation and illustration. A significant part is that it differentiates to how it renders and interprets facial features like the eye. In portraiture, we often talk about particular methods to render eyes, as intrinsically we're drawn to looking at them for social cues. And interestingly, anime sort of has its own thing, you know, to focus on the eye. So in general, when drawing anime, the eyes serve as a focal point. And to accentuate that, they're drawn to be enlarged as well as be the most ornate part of the face. When detailing eyes, largely we're dealing with 5 parts. We have the lash, the iris, the eye white, and the highlight. Lashes can have multiple thicknesses and degrees of curvature to them. The iris is one of the most important parts. It's the most detailed, concentrated part, and it allows for the most freedom of stylization between artists. The pupil is also included in this detail, but for the most part, usually leaves the iris the job for showing contraction. So the iris usually augments for better visual contrast. A lot of the time, artists use the same iris design over a cast only to augment color, shape, and scale for different characters in order to keep a thread to a style. The eye white is very sensitive to scaling and is generally left pretty muted and unlined in order to complement focus to the lash line and iris. The highlight is what gives liveliness to the eye, and its omission implies a seriousness to the character's feeling. The highlight is also a point that splits somewhat from reality. Usually in photography and stuff, it's usually shown to reflect light off an eyeball, but for anime, its placement can really greatly influence the feel of where a character is looking and focusing. There's extra meaning to the augmentation of all these parts. So what does this say? Like, what can anime eyes tell us as a viewer? So I see anime eyes as a key marker that viewers can observe and glean information for who a character is or what their traits are. Scaling and rotating some of these elements is usually used to foreshadow this, or, sometimes it can be used to, throw the viewer off. It's like, oh, you weren't that type of character. Why do you look like a meanie, So generally, large rounded eyes, they give a friendly, approachable look, and angled cat-like features can get an audience to feel that a particular character is more calculating or sharp-witted. Interestingly, the way that the nose and mouth are rendered, they're simplified, so they don't draw attention away from, what we're getting at to the eye. Another thing to study is how anime expresses themselves and emotes. So when anime characters emote, especially with like the really big, comedic symbols like the veins or the sweat, it's not realistic, but there's a quality that communicates the feeling, and it comes from a keen observation and using a perception of other senses. So it can be a whole new language based on what we want these stylized rendered features to move. I would also recommend doing like a chart of expressions in order to exercise what your instincts are when you look at an expression. You can also sort of glean this from photos. So when you see an angry face, generally, its eyebrows pointing down, you can get that cue and then reflect it in your work. So moving on to the second point, placing and composition. So placing and composition is how we present the work. So it determines anime's way of drawing people. And so, anime is a style of drawing people, so inevitably you're going to have to study how to draw from the real thing. So some people can start off from simple diagrams, usually given by other artists, but I think that relying on another person's observation can only take you so far. Taking the step to study observation from the source allows you to form your skill from your actions. It also improves your knowledge on anatomy and provides confidence to translate 3D form to an image. So I started to begin adopting these lessons only to see how I could really use them in my own stylized work. But in doing so, they've really given me skills that I use again and again. So I like to think of these techniques in art is like what grammar is to language. It's like a system that allows for our communication, our subject matter, what we see, to be standardized in a universally understood format. So observation and life drawing exercises your perception. so how you see your subject, and how your hand can translate it down to paper. Mentally, as you approach new ways to think about the subject, you can start to develop your own ways to render and flesh things out and get a feel for the nature of what you're drawing, which in turn will help you determine proportion and lighting. So studying anatomy can be used not only to build up a drawing, but to strip down and simplify. When drawing from observation, you can catch on to the details that are super handy to like show and highlight. And on the flip side, we can simplify objects that we need to decide what details are important. So it's like curating. So, you know, with a hand, you might get rid of the nails because it's a unnecessary detail at that point. So I would also recommend to consider an exercise where you slowly add in levels of anatomical detail. That can sort of give you a gauge of when you're going too far into things, as well as, you know, sort of highlight what you're sort of missing. Like if you're missing like a joint or a tendon, you know, you'll be able to perceive that as you go along. So anime is not exempt from learning how to perceive your piece in a 3D space. So hands and feet are really common areas that artists tend to struggle with if they don't think about how it interacts in a way that reflects real life. A general idea of the shape of the face can also determine how you light them and cell shade them in later. So hair. These are just small tips on stuff I see about hair. So people can see it as a fun aspect of drawing in an anime style. So I guess to bump it up a level, consider sectioning it to areas where it leaves a scalp. Consider the direction, consider hairlines, as well as like how close it is to the scalp, like how thick the hair is. Also, I would recommend for longer hair to establish a main shape and include offshoots with like a similar tightness to curve, but without losing like the idea that this is a big main shape, like a volume. Also, I would recommend to keep tips with shorter hair at different volumes so you don't get repetition within your piece. So in saying that, if anime or any style is a type of visual adaptation, then there needs to be a source from where it comes from. So without drawing from prior learning and without looking and referencing and internalizing like your subject matter, how the body moves, how I get confused at how you would show that on a canvas without that knowledge. So honing your perception and interpreting it in a way that can be communicated to others is a definite skill. Anime is not an exception to learning anatomy or painting realistically. It actually reacts very well to what you know of anatomy, and gives you a lot of options to use when you're crafting like your pieces, when you're building them up. So your level of interpretation is largely attributed to developing your taste. I would highly encourage people to keep some sort of collection, be it a sketchbook or a mood board. For me, it's like Twitter bookmarks and Pinterest boards. It's really handy to have like a reference to come back to, and to have some archive of work that, you know, really moved you or you really like, so you can go back and dissect them later and, you know, figure out like why does it appeal to me so much. So the extent, like how much that you use this reference and go back to it, can help keep your style focused. So try to have some diversity of content in there too. So you can have environments or fashion or, I don't know, some really philosophical, I don't know, threads or lectures or whatever. Car parts, if you want to design like a mech. Take note on what feeling or association it evokes from you, and try reverse it to engineer to find out where it really comes from. So a great practice of this is taking an everyday object, or like, you know, whatever can hold your attention really, and construct and design something like a character around it, or, you know, to use it as a prop. So up here, not the Simpsons one, there are a couple of examples that I really like that I feel are really skilled in the way that they do this. So the lipstick one, it works because it keeps the scale of the quilted black casing to like the overall canvas. Like it's way up on like the waist, which sort of reflects the actual object. The shoulders, being a part that juts out naturally in like a horizontal fashion, it makes for a suitable spot to mirror the curved shape of the metal on top, and is highlighted with like a light puffed material. Red, for the universal color that we associate with lipstick, is used as like the background. The pose is confident and commanding, and it feels like a character that, you know, is not to be messed with. The medical one, it gives great contrast, because, you know, initially we see the dark of the X-ray scan, and then slowly we start to notice the light colors that are given to the character. This coldness sort of gives it a clinical feeling. So yeah, you sort of get a sense of like things are serious. It's like a hospital setting, like it feels right. The translation of these concepts to something like these characters assists in guiding our audience to establish a connection to the object, or a connection to the mood that you want to highlight. It can create a very memorable character that people can easily connect with that way. So doing experiments and style studies can get a perception, can give you a perception into the range of things that you want to associate with. So, you know, I see people filling pages and pages and pages of like eyes, but only changing minute qualities, like augmenting and subbing in different shapes. I would consider taking another way of thinking of it. So, you know, you can still have all your eye designs, but then think about the best kind of character that those would belong to or complement. Stress test your ideas for different scenarios and genres. But it's also important to get to know when things go too far. So, you know, I gave this style sheet to Kevin initially, saying, oh, all these are anime. And he's like, these aren't, which is fair to say. So, you know, when adjustments happen for the sake of adjustment, it's actually a very volatile way to approach anime. It kind of like has you mindfully drawing for you know, no emotional take back. So yeah, it can kind of, I guess, distract you from the task at hand. So yeah, sometimes, you know, sometimes we've got to respect that aspects from other styles just plain won't work for what you need. And yeah, in recognizing that, you can get another perception, the perception of what's not supposed to be there. So yeah, as you go and develop and shape like your visual language, you'll start to pick up on methods and techniques that are better suited to draw instinct from others, as well as like holding and piquing like your interest as well. So as a beginner, I started off with like how to draw manga books. Although like, you know, the advice is somewhat questionable, they did teach me to have an eye for proportion and how to build from primitive shapes. So, you know, it taught me how to draw eyes, how to, you know, draw ears and all that stuff. But there comes a plateau where you start to think about, where am I putting these? So for experienced illustrators, we don't just look at like the size relationship from the head to the body or the size of eyes to the face shape. We should also consider the way these elements are placed to give them sense of what they are. So yeah, like you can draw like amazing eyes, but without supplementary backup that sells those eyes and makes those eyes feel like they're there, the interest really starts to nosedive. So with a desire to improve your art, the real work is determining where they should be to sell the work to create dimension, interest, and flow. So this is where we start to manipulate and transform for the purpose of grabbing attention. So if you look at these three heads, I would generally say try to avoid placement that has the eyes fatiguing, like these really close horizontal straights. Our brain kind of tends to fill it in, and so, you know, it sort of feels predictable. Our brain is also very perceptive of patterns, and in some cases that can be great, but in cases like the face, it can be unideal, and it can also look flat and lifeless. So try to consider the distance of eyes to each other, and try to play up with the scaling or the distance to, or how it reacts to the face shape. One of the struggles I notice is artists who get stuck on general spacing or the proportion of facial features. So spacing in this context is how you determine, you know, where to put, you know, that one floaty eye that you know, is sort of detached from everything else. So when working with an anime face in different perspectives, I wouldn't necessarily aim for perfect alignment. So sometimes to make harmony and balance, you got to take some artistic liberties and manipulate and move things around. So if you don't have the spacing down, you can have, in some cases, a character that looks completely different or off. So spacing, when done right, it sells both the character and perspective. But if an element is catching on a focal point and is out of alignment, then it isn't contributing to the flow of what we determine is the set perspective. It can be a bit of mental gymnastics to figure out, especially if working with more advanced drafting like foreshortening. But generally, you know, with guidelines and and improved perception, you can sort of start to train that. So in determining Necrobarista's style, I would do a Cartesianality exercise. So my aim was to look my aim was to keep the look of the character consistent while changing the perspective or changing the angles. So, you know, some things I noticed were that in determining the face shape first, it sort of sets a rule where, you know, you can place your eyes to that perspective. If you work at it backwards, if you determine the eyes first, it sort of starts to muddle things up, and it makes it exponentially more difficult to determine that perspective. I would also recommend keeping the center of the mouth in line with the chin. So it gives it more of a stable perspective, like the mouth isn't just sliding around everywhere across the face. I would also try consider adding some scale and shape language, so you're able to separate and identify different characters from each other. So change up the face real estate. For cuter characters, the big point that artists like to make is a bigger emphasis on the roundness and how big eyes are in comparison to the rest of the features. But if we look at the negative space around facial features, these details are kept to the same level of detail, like all the lashes, you know, have the same characteristic to them. It's just that I changed the negative space and how far they're spaced apart. So, you know, we can sort of get a gauge that there's like 4 different generations of this character on the page now. We can also use this technique to create differentiation between different characteristics. So, you know, by changing the scale, we can augment like age, we can augment like body type as well. It all trickles down into our perception and what we think is, or what we can like sort of feel from what we're doing. So I guess for some applications in games, it's really straightforward to insert an anime style, especially if you're working with 2D assets. With 2D assets, it's really dependent on the size of your team and the scope. You may have assets that, you may have like hundreds of assets that you need to do when you're only one person. It just may not be suitable economically. For us, we were sort of lucky in that our game has fixed camera angles. You don't have the player moving around and sort of like, you know, spying on things. And that was really because we didn't want to use like the standard dialogue format in visual novels. So what we did was we tried to use a 3D rig just to maintain and control the consistency of characters. We also considered using like a 2D face rendering system that could maybe allow for a hand-drawn feel, but in practice we deemed it too expensive and risky, and I was getting pretty burnt out. So I guess subsequently we decided that we would make blend shapes for extremes, but also in working with the special spacing and perspective that anime gets, we also have like a safe position system. So it allows for like the free movement of like facial features, and we can save them to a camera shot. Yeah. So rendering. Rendering can take on a whole lot of different characteristics. You can have really sharp, defined, like sharp, I guess in a sense, like really heavy line art, or you can have like really soft pieces that almost contain no line art at all. So a lot of the time when starting off, artists sort of pick an in-between. They start with line and cell shading because it's like, you know, the anime thing. And then, I guess, to play to their strengths, they can tweak what they would want the line quality to be later. So line has a large foundation and history in the rendering of anime art, but it does have subtle quirks that can leave pieces looking a little off, even with the best of intentions. When talking about line quality, it's usually about smoothness and momentum. Rarely in anime do you find scratchy or wobbly lines, and even so, they're really for like comedic effect. Scratchy lines are really unideal for big defining lines. They have less of a focal direction and are usually reserved for like really short detail work in order to complement the longer lines. In general practice, I like to think about the relationship of lines. Do they flow into one another? Do they like intersect and create like really, I guess, tight looking spaces? And so, yeah, generally with line art, in order to create that smooth line, you need to be really confident. You need to like have really defined brush strokes with your medium, and yeah, just control Z it all the way. So this is a good example, and it's a rather recent example. So, you know, I was really hungry that day. I was like, I have this sketch I want to finish, and I want to do it before lunch. And so, you know, I just banged it out. But yeah, you know, I went and ate, got my blood sugar up, cells at work, sat back down, and I was like, oh man, you know, I'm just going to redo it. And I guess the difference we can really see how smoothly eye transitions over the second piece, how the direction of the lines in the fringe like really flow into the tighter side of the face. It sort of creates, a really nice flow and doesn't hit at like a dead spot like the first picture. So yeah, lines and how you approach them are key influences that drive the viewer's eyes. So really make sure they lead somewhere intentional. With line weight variance, I see it as like seasoning to your cooking. You gotta like really taste as you go. I would recommend starting light and then determining where your focus wants to be, and then filling in to complement that. So yeah, its purpose really is to add interest as well as accentuate the flow. So balance it out to the needs of your image. If you're too heavy, or if you're too light on lines, there tends to be no variance. There's no weight to it. The work can look flat. Some people also swear by adding in weight to, I guess, each corner or edge that is in shadow. But in trying that, I wouldn't really recommend it. You know, it feels really formulaic. It feels like you're doing it for the sake of doing it. And in some cases, you know, when you're, I guess, in a formulaic state, your thinking can be like, you can like sit back and be like, oh my God, like what did I do? It can feel really muddled and overworked. Usually, when thinking about line thickness, it's usually because I really want to define two materials or properties. So for example, clothing and skin, nails, the lash line, top of the iris, I would want the viewer to take notice of those. I would also consider bumping the thickness when I have long lines, or when I have long lines that shape a detail, like, but don't have, there's like a starkness to it. It's just skin. So like the calves of legs or forearms, just to keep it from feeling too flat when you're traveling from like the face to the hand. Like there needs to be some sort of ease into that. So for line techniques, I really like to look at pieces that I think do it really well and dissect them and study them and trace them. As you go and make your own observations, you can really get a feel on the required movements that you need to do to achieve that on your own equipment. So yeah, tonal value it can be used to great effect in creating contrast, whether it be detail or how packed black and white fits in an area, or big swathes that create an interesting shape and direction in the piece. When coloring, also consider the tonal values when you put your image in grayscale. If they're too similar, they can reveal why areas can seem really flat. Cell shading, I would perceive it as kind of a shorthand to lighting. If you know your lighting around your perceived character's features, like the nose, you sort of know, then it gets easier to determine where you have to go. I would really recommend to be wary in shading areas that can throw off the negative space feeling that we discussed earlier. So using your 3D perception, you can use shadows to really strengthen the face shape. So like areas like the neck that connects to the chin are really good areas to really define that point. Also, I would recommend to be really careful with highlights. They can go a little crazy if they're done a little bit too granularly and repetitively across the shape of the head. Yeah, so think about the nature of the light when it hits the face, and try to balance it so it doesn't take too much away from the focus of the face. So yeah, in summary, I would really recommend that you keep committing yourself to anime, but really explore your options in art. You can really add these small details to your art that can, that viewers can pick up on. Viewers can be like, oh, like they know, I can really get a sense of like the shape of the head, and it makes a really nice shape. And so, yeah, I would recommend to also develop your perceptive eye. So like really get a sense of like concepts and what they mean to you, and how you can symbolize that in your character design as well. Yeah, so in saying that, some people can say that anime is really simple, and it's like you're making stuff up, but it isn't. It actually really takes in a broader study of the arts, and it's in studying those parts and then simplifying it is where you can really sort of find and understand anime a lot more. yeah, know your, I spelt the wrong palette, but know your taste, work your inspiration into your work, and really give it the love and love it deserves. And yeah, and in doing that, like really connect with yourself, like really trust why you feel about certain aspects of a piece, and try work like intuition, and recognize like recognize recognize when you're doing really well, and just like, yeah, make note of like why that's happening. So yeah, questions. I'm sure there's a lot. Yeah? No? Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's what politics is for, I guess.
Test. Hello, hello.
Yep.
Yeah, just as a 3D artist, I guess I'm just curious about you. How closely related to the 3D work for Necrobarista were you involved?
So I worked on the model sheets. I've also worked really closely with our 3D artist. There were points where he would show me like face blend shapes, and I'll be like, nah, those don't look right. There's something about them. Let me go back to the papers and work it out. And so, yeah, there was a lot of back and forth, especially in terms of the way that we do cell shading in our game. He was largely responsible for like the maps, so you don't see like really jagged edges that, you know, rendering sort of gives you. So yeah.
I don't want to hog the mic too much, but were there any insights maybe you could share just in like when you notice with shading? It's like, yeah, like jagged edges, like was there anything else that came up that
really, hands are a really big deal. Really focus on like this, especially the thumb pad. It's just been an issue that I'm sort of venting to you all. But like, you know, it needs to sort of have that meaty feel to it. It'd be really great if rigs sort of had that and not just be like super flat. Yeah, yeah. Does anyone want to work and make anime games with me? Because yeah, it can be really hard, especially, you know, if you have no, I don't know, you sort of feel like, you know, these artists in Japan, they're sort of like really working hard and working like all bloody hours, you know, to make this like, you know, one thing. Whereas, you know, if you're in Australia, you don't necessarily have that thing. You sort of just like have to go and explore, you know, in less of a formal education sense, but more of a hobbyist sense. So buying a lot of art books and stuff, that's really my thing, and gleaning over it.
Hi, nice
Hi.
talk. Your treatment of environments versus the characters, like did you put much work into like differentiating the two so that one would stand out sometimes, or is there anything there that you could show us?
Yeah, with Necrobarista, it essentially was like a love letter in Melbourne, and so what we did was go to a whole heap of like cafes and really get a sense of like the exposed brickwork, or like that industrial, like sort of rusty metal sense. And, you know, just to sort of reflect on like what it means to live in this city. I wanted to also put that into the character design as well. There's like a character called Ashley. She wears like an Australian school uniform. She wears like the, you know, the shoes with the holes, or Mary Jane's or whatever. And I really wanted to place that in to sort of give a nod to like, this is what I see. And this can be like, you know, translated into an anime format.
Did you find that, say, you were adding too much detail into an environment sometimes and it was clashing with characters and things, or was there ever a moment where you had to sort of rebalance that sort of stuff, or was it all?
Yeah, there was a point with Maddie's skirt. It actually was, we chose the environment over Maddie. But yeah, there were like a lot of staircases, and it was really troublesome to animate like a long skirt going up and doing all these like, things. And so we just like scrapped it, made a shorter skirt. But that was like mainly because of constraints from the team and all that. So yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Hi. Do you have any favorite art books or art books that inspired you or gave you some guidance, I guess?
I don't know the name, but there's a really good bunch of art books that actually are like an anthology of the character art that's been done in anime and games that year. I reference it a lot. There's also Toshi's books I really enjoy as well. They give a lot of insight into like shorthand for drawing in anime art as well. So like, how to draw a skeleton that isn't like, I don't know, that isn't too detailed, or, just, let me think. Gengar as well is really interesting to see, because it gives like, key moments that the audience can like sort of catch on, and it's not like the in-betweens. Yeah, I would say that's probably it. Oh, maybe Yo-Yo Shinari's sketchbooks as well. They've been really insightful. Like, dude just draws a lot. It's kind of inspiring.
Cool, thanks.
Were there any aspects of the anime design that didn't translate well into 3D?
I guess line is super like finicky to work with. I'm not sure. Like I sort of feel like it can all sort of work. You just need the framework. You just need the flexibility in your rigs to sort of account for that. I guess eye rotation so the reason why we have fixed camera angles is because like when you're really working for the focus of one camera angle and then you just suddenly go to a different camera angle, it can just like really look give an uncanny valley sort of feel when you're like interpolating between those two angles. There's sort of like an awkward space where the eyes are just like, wait, we're going to turn here now. Yeah, so just like in relation to the camera and the angles of where the eyes are facing, and when you change them, like there's a gritty thing that happens. Yeah.
If you were going to start a new project, what type of like stylistic feature or like aspect of anime would you want to imbue as like a core thing? Would it be the faces, or like what's something that you see that you'd like to improve on what you've done previously?
I probably would say the faces. Yeah, just the design of them is I would say a little bit a little bit too, I guess, soft or like, I don't know, this, I'm still sort of working it out. The spacing, I guess, of the eyes is in relation to the face. I would really think about the way that I'm drawing my model sheets as well, because sometimes when interpolating between like the front and the side, there can be discrepancies. There needs to be some sort of pass that needs to happen to catch on like parts where it might be too voluminous. Like, you know, Joe might, I don't know, I might draw like the wrist like super fat here, and then it'll sort of show when you know, change rotations and yeah. Yeah, that sort of stuff. I think we're good. If anyone has any other questions, they're totally free to tweet me. I do feel like I'm better in writing than, you know, trying to say like, oh, you know, this drawing in like words and stuff. But yeah. Yeah, cool. Thank you, everyone.